Hello everyone. Welcome to the the CSIG-VIS International Lecture Series. Today is the first event of the year of 2022. Before the lecture, let's welcome Professor Xiaoru Yuan from Peking University to give us opening remarks of the series event of 2022. Welcome, Professor Xiaoru Yuan.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for coming to this event. Indeed, today is the 8th event in this series. Starting from last year, we already have 7 invited speakers give us lectures from different sub-area in visualization. We have people working on scientific visualization, information visualization, and visual analytics, and design or art. So last year, starting from Professor Ruige Xu, and we also have another 6 people come here. Due to the COVID-19, so this is also one approach. We try to still keep our international academic exchange going on. So today we are very happy. We have our first talk for this 2022. Before the talk, let me briefly talk about our CSIG visualization committee. So this is the visualization and the computer and the visual analytics technical committee in the Chinese Society of Image and Graphics. We started from 2017. Altogether now we have around 200 committee members and several hundred other member of CSIG who are quite often participating in our activities. Every year we have quite a large number of events. In this year, this particular international talk series is the first event for this new year. 2022, we're gonna also have our annual China-VIS in July in Qinghai, Xining, and we also have this talk. We continue for another 13 times before the summer, and we're gonna restart again like in the autumn of 2022. So every year we have around like 20 of such international speakers. We're gonna also have activities going to like university or activities between the academics and the industry. So here, like I would like to send a warm welcome to everyone who want to participate in the events and also who want to join our technical committee of visualization and visual analytics. Wherever you are inside China or like in other countries, we are open to globally. So just let me keep it short. So let me hand over to our chair today, Professor Tao Jun. So I think Tao Jun can introduce our honored speaker today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Professor Yuan, for giving the opening remarks. Then we are moving to our talk today. So we are truly honored to have Professor Jian Chen from the Ohio State University to give us the talk of humanizing visualization through vision science. And so before the talk, let me briefly introduce Professor Chen. She really have an outstanding record. So let me just give a brief version of the introduction. So Professor Chen is a tenure associate professor in the Department of Computer Science and Engineering at the Ohio State University. Her research centers on interactive data visualization, 3-dimensional immersive interaction, and computing for social good. She also shares multiple conference best paper and poster awards with her collaborators. She also, outside of computer science venues, Professor Chen also published work in applying visualizations to brain science. Her research has been supported by grants from like NSF, NIST, DOD, and the industry. Before joining the Ohio State University, she also worked for the University of Maryland and Brown University. She obtained her PhD degree from Virginia Tech, and she also served the community on many positions. For example, like the IEEE-VIS 2027 and 2022, she served as a paper chair, and she also served as a voting member of IEEE Visualization Academy and many other academic service. So let's welcome Professor Chen Jian for her talk. Okay, so I will stop my sharing and hand out to Professor Chen.
All right, so thank you very much for the nice introduction and for inviting me. So, so it's a great honor to be here. As you can tell, I'm so delighted to give a talk here. So actually followed a few talks in the past, and they have been like really fascinating. So if with a little luck today, hopefully my talk will remain reasonably interesting for the next hour. So let's give it a try. So I titled my talk Humanizing Visualization. So because my recent work really driven by understanding recent advances of human vision and computer vision, especially in the area of AI. So in the end of the day, my belief has always been that any technology is really serving human dignity and humanity. So that's drives me to working in the area where I collaborate with scientists and also try to contribute very broadly. So for full disclosure, so the project I'm to talk about today are funded through National Institute of Standard and Technology and the National Science Foundation. They are related to 3 different interdisciplinary scientific data analysis, for example, in brain imaging and nanoparticle analysis related to quantum physics, and also genomics research about large graphs. So as a scholar, so I personally feel obliged to return the knowledge to the community I serve and the students I teach. So all the tools I discussed today are open source, and all experimental data are also released to the public. So just in case I forget to put the link there, you can always shoot me an email and ask. All right, so let's see. So this is going to be a kind of like a blurb slides, and that includes a lot of projects that I'm not going to talk about today. So my lab is called Interactive Visual Computing Lab. So with my student, we work on solving challenging interdisciplinary problems that really involves a lot of data. For example, brain data come from neuroscientists who are also clinicians carrying out their important procedure. And we actually chase for perceptual accuracy most of the time because they are hoping that the protocols are met and there would be no medical errors or any risk hazard or any other safety issues, because we are really interested in combining and integrating the work with their existing workflow to have a real world impact. So I have to acknowledge my collaborators who just make the public release of tools sounds so easy, although my other collaborators sort of often my other CS colleagues actually often complain how hard it is. So in every project, we meet with scientists who need to go through many years of training to become an expert, and we learn what questions they have been asking and their decision process. So in every stage we build, I always make sure that we don't just manage design and algorithm, but also delivering insightful values to scientists concerning the bigger question of human factor issues. So my lab mainly dealing with the human-centered design and try to build the tools that actually serve people. All right, so we often actually start from beginning to consider human factor issues, although sometimes I don't talk about it much. So it has never been afterthoughts for all projects we build. So the key question I really want to answer today is, if you want to find, allow people to find the data, and then what should it look like, right? So what your data should look like. So if you look at the past empirical studies, and then they focus on, so the Cleveland-McGill may be familiar to many of you. There are still charts, relationships with a few data items. And my students actually begin to look into the empirical study and found out that most study actually take less than 20 seconds. That's not how scientists use data. So oftentimes I ask myself what it takes to build useful tools. So today I'm going to talk about design theory. So a lot of tools we build are interactive, but I'm just going to focus on the visual side. And especially, I'm going to focus on this attentional guidance today, driven by the new vision science theory, which I learned when I took my sabbatical at Harvard. So why do we worry about attention at all? So so I'm going to give two parts of the talk. So the first part is really about quantum physics and huge data, small particle realization. And the second part, I'm going to talk a little bit on the algorithm side, how we actually begin to understand what is realization through analyzing image data. So why do I want to do this attention guidance? So to those who actually don't know quantum physics, this is an illustration of what a quantum simulation look like. So these are just small particles, and then quantum physicists basically release something called a quantum dot into this grid structure. And then they measure the atom behaviors. It's actually believed that quantum physics govern about 1/3 of the world economy. And I was fortunate that my collaborator actually come from the lab where they actually won 2 Nobel Prize because they could run this very scalable simulation. So the quantum physics doesn't follow the traditional Newtonian physics law. So each atom, as you can see, I depicted on the screen. So it's called what they call is a spin. So spin, physicists actually are very good at describing things intuitively. They like metaphors. So spin kind of describe the behavior of the atom orientation, how they rotate. But at a single location, there could be multiple states. And then the other attribute is that the spin often also represents energy, so they call it charge density. So the magnitude, basically the length of the arrow, represents the charge density, which is a large range data. So if you think about it, so the number I gave there is 10 to the power minus 15 to 10 to the power minus 4. So if you think about it, if you use the smallest one, like 1 centimeter to represent the smallest particle, and then the largest one is basically from the Earth to the moon. So if you use, so this is also not a vector field, I want to make it clear. So this is more like a wave equation, right? So it's more of magnetics field where the particles, the adjacent neighboring particles has no continuity. So their magnitude and orientation can change dramatically. And there is also no computational solution that allow them to actually say, apply some magic algorithm and see the results, right? So they just throw the particle there and observe the phenomena. So this is what it looks like from output from their simulation. There would be 10K particles, and this is a much simplified drawing because at each location, we call it a vector spin. And that's a very simplified description of what's going on in that location as well. So so for this audience, at that single grid point, there is a one point, and it has a magnitude and has an orientation. So you can see that, so they are interested in local patterns, local to the scale as a single spin location. They are interested in what's the magnitude, and often they are interested in the bigger one. Just like other CSIG-VIS problem, they are also interested in relationships. So if you see a big, so you see on your screen a big bubble, look, that's actually the dot location. They can just randomly place some dots and then measure what the output would look like. They are interested in inside, outside the dots, etc. So how do we see things? How do we see from this very dense representation? So if you consider this is a standard thing from your textbook, right? So they will tell you there is a bottom-up approach, and then there are a whole bunch of visual stimuli. They allow you to see information. For example, if you have something like one thing that's very different, then this is the orientation, it stand out and then stand out. And then something like closure, they would stand out as well. So, and then size stand out, color certainly, and numbers and density. So this is the traditional bottom-up approach. So if this is how our world works, then we're in trouble, right? So because then that means I need to figure out which vector the quantum physicists want to see and then render it. Recently, so the Vision Science Society actually flipped the coin and say, okay, so it's not really what pop up as a single attribute. It's actually, when we perceive the world, it's a global ensemble features that are also pre-attentive. So to those who are wondering about this pre-attentive word, so it's heavily a loaded word that's often being misunderstood in realization, to take it as something. So attention means you put your eye on something, right? So if you're staring at my slides and then you attend to something, right? So, but when we perceive our world, we don't have to attend and we can still notice things. So they figure out there are several attributes, for example, size, orientation, etc., that are actually pre-attentive as well. So when we understand the world, we understand as a there is a continuity. Say if you are looking for your friends who are biking to attend this competition, and at the ending point, and you're looking for your friend, you certainly won't look at the mountain, and hopefully your friend won't fall, and then you won't look at the ground, right? So you're just looking at the flow coming to you, and try to look for your friend. So you already predetermined what information that needs to be removed. So in the first slides, I showed you a very busy slide. And then you perhaps wonder, okay, I put it there for so long on purpose. So humans, we are simplifier. We actually are good at removing the information that's not relevant to the task on our hand as well. So if I tell you that to look for my 5-year-old son from this figure, and then you actually might have trouble, or you have to do a sequential scan. This is like a finding Waldo kind of thing, where you have to look at the object, and especially when you don't know what my son would look like. And then I can highlight those to you, and there are many of them, and then you perhaps never notice them at all. And this is basically my son was on bike, and he wore a blue helmet. And then you didn't realize there are also people added to the scene who are Americans doing Tai Chi in the park. And my older 7-year-old is also located on the brain. You perhaps never noticed. So in a single second, there are billions of pixels that are in front of us, but we really don't see every location on our brain and in our sight. So we try not to overload our memory, working memory, which is a very limited resource. So often you can only scan about 2 items. So you can understand about 2 locations from the environment. So this is a new workflow presented in Wolf's 2021 article, which is called guided search. So I was inspired. So I know this article well when I was at Harvard listening to his talk. So the idea is that there is a global experience that happened first before the very detailed schooling. So we generally binding features to the object, which is the older understanding, which is very time-consuming business. But the first stage generally is effortless. So in a single second, you can actually quickly scan 10 to 20 items. So this dual process view has been dominating vision science in the past 2 years. So what do I mean by binding? So binding has 2 meanings now. So the first one is without attention. So that means if I have this cross and then you see some blue and red, and then you just treat them the same. And then the second stage is with attention is much more complex, right? So if I ask you to find this cross, and then you have to kind of go through the entire view, and then maybe after a while you figure, oh, actually half of what is shown before you is the has this red bar in the vertical direction. And then if you are sometimes an outlier, you are so smart, you will notice there is another one here. So the binding process for color, which I have spending a lot of time studying in the past on brain imaging to help brain scientists draw different brain regions in the tractography. So color is an interesting phenomenon. It's really not about the absolute color itself. It's actually about the relative to its surrounding. For example, the 2 blue shape actually has exactly the same color, but you will find this much harder to find than this one, because this one has the green as the surrounding. And then the shape is also much harder than the color, at least to human. But to neural network, recently they actually find out the neural network is very good at shape. and then actually very poor at what humans are good at. So I asked this question, okay, so if we could, okay, before that, so if I ask you to find this box, and then it's actually easy because if I give you the target, and then it become a pattern matching. So that's what my boss often say, just tell them what they need to find, and then it's a lot easier to find it, right? So you don't notice things you don't know. Okay, so back to the quantum physics data. So this would be what they conventional look at the data, and then this already simplified as a contour plot along each simulation plane. And then you can see that the very small vector will be very difficult to see, and the very large one will be too large. So you won't be able to learn the skill properly if we just use the traditional linear approach. So my student came up, and I came up with the idea. So generally, if you have very large number, and you can do what physicists does is to do the log, right? So you could log the number and deduct the skill. But the problem with log is that it's nonlinear. So what we did is we created this split vector, which is a glyph representation. So if you have this huge number, and then what you would do is you would draw two cylinders in place, and then the inner cylinder represents the digit, and then the outer cylinder represents the exponent. So we carefully actually added the legend onto this small glyph at each location, and then people can, so if you want to count, you can actually count. And if you count, it turned out that if you compare different approaches, which is the traditional vector field drawing approach using direct linear, or you can use a log approach, or you can just put text on each one. So sometimes if you submit a paper, they always ask you, why don't you just put text labels, right? But it's actually crowd the scene very quickly if you have very dense environment. But regardless, here we also put the text here on top of each split vector. And then this is our split vector representation. Sorry, this is actually doesn't have any scale. The length is the same for every vector, and then you have this text there. So it turned out that, so we gave them several tasks. It turned out that our split vector representation is just as good as text, and it's 9 times better than either the log or the linear approach. So our collaborator actually really amazed because he actually had trouble seeing patterns using their approach, and we just did a very simple representation. It significantly reduced the amount of time he would spend figuring out the structure in the data. So this product is already being delivered to NIST for people, for quantum physicists to use. So so these are so the tasks we gave them. The first one is magnitude reading. So as I said earlier, they are interested in single location where they are interested in the vector magnitude. So if you think about it, if you forget about vector, this is just like my other brain scientists who are interested in tumor locations, and then even a little bit of it, and then they want to know where they are, etc. So ratio task, basically ask them what's the scale between the two. This is a very common task studied in realization, again, originated from the Cleveland McGill and even Yalton McKinley's summary of the past literature. So, and then they are interested in how much larger one is to the other. And then you can see the split vector again achieved a very high accuracy, even matching accuracy to the text display. So the horizontal axis are the method we compare. The vertical axis is the accuracy. So also this is very scalable. In general, it doesn't really matter the scale we use in the data. So it's so it can be up to 100 people can still be fairly accurate. But if you look at the linear approach, it kind of not so scalable. If you have very large power, the linear simply don't work, right? So that's make perfect sense. And log is kind of bad all the time. People won't be able to figure out the scale at all, which is also, you know, quite intuitive, right? So what's wrong is comparison, which is very important task to quantum physicists. So what we figure is so the horizontal axis is still the method, the vertical axis is the time. So accuracy remained pretty high. The problem is time. So compared to, certainly it's almost the same as reading, right? So read is very slow. So we're not really beating the classical linear approach. So this leads us to think about the design. So instead of using our traditional split vector approach, so we came up with a few other solutions. So the solution actually allow us to utilize the global structure of the environment. So this is another data set where this is a split vector representation. You still have this digit and the exponent. So this represents 440. So we're only encoding the vector magnitude. So here is a split vector, what we just tested but failed the comparison task. Certainly you can flip it. You can say, okay, instead of having this collinear axis, I could just flip the exponent axis and to have this volume representation, which is in the original, so Bertin's taxonomy only up to the area, but this is a three-dimensional kind of volume representation of this two variable component. And then you could also say, okay, in the vision science literature, they are saying that if you want to achieve the ensemble effect, actually it's not the size that give you the best answer, it's actually categorical data. So if you remember many ranking papers you perhaps learned from this class, the best categorical one is actually color. So this is where we added the color component to the display, where so you can, so our guess is that when you have different power or different exponents mapped to the data, and then if you are looking for something, you can quickly remove the region, just like the bicycle scene I showed you earlier that you see in vision science. And then this actually gave you the power to significantly reduce by just glancing the data. Similarly, you could just say, okay, I'm not going to have this size redundant encoding. I'm just going to have the scene cylinder, which I use color to map to exponent and use a digit to map to the length of the cylinder. So in the VIS literature and also the review we got, and the reviewer say, oh, so they actually assume the redundancy always works because whenever you have another channel to encode your data, actually often improve the amount of information flowing into your eyes by about 1.2 or 1 to 1.4 compared to a single digit. So you would guess that the one in the middle would win, right? So this is the lens color representation, and then this is the lens texture. So texture, we use the Bertin's representation where it represented the proportion of black and white. He also called it green in French. So and then you have this 0, which is pure white, or you have proportion 25% for one, 50 for 2, and then the whole 100% for 3. So the effect of the texture actually is to give you the luminance. So Colin Ware in his book said that actually luminance, human eyes have a pretty good resolution for luminance. That's why whenever you encode the color, you don't just use a hue. Luminance give you structure to data, right? So okay, so we apply kind of like combine the vision science theory and see if we could get a good result. So I didn't put the comparison there, but actually, so it's achieved the comparable performance to the linear in this case. And then what we run additional task is to say, okay, so if we allow people to do this global ensemble, can we ask them to search for a vector value from this entire several hundreds of vectors? So it's almost looking for a needle from a haystack. Can people actually do this quickly? Because quantum physics, like I said earlier, they don't have a mechanism to do so. So this shows the results. In general, this lens color actually gives the best result. And then the lens texture generally, so if you see the same letter, that's basically statistical analysis. This is a post hoc analysis where the two fall into the same group, means statistically they are not different. So if you look at the search task and find the maximum value task, in general, this two, the last two actually work really well. The split vector kind of like, it doesn't have the global ensemble attribute. So we kind of validate the idea that having the global ensemble actually significantly improve the performance. So we try to understand the mechanism. So what are the behavior? What's the user are doing if you give them this type of data? So this is what we found out. So this is the eye tracking data. So our recent experiment, what we measure is we say, okay, so if this effect actually pop out, would randomizing the location of the split vector also allow them to see the pattern properly? And the answer is actually yes. So that's what surprised us the most, because either in Tamara Monsner's book or in Bertant's book, paper plane is the most important attribute to humans. And now we generally don't randomize, we're not good at recognizing the random vectors. But since this global ensemble allows this distributed attention, meaning that you don't need to focus on an item, but you can still pick up the important attribute from your world, this actually makes perfect sense, because for survival, and then we can notice dangerous environment, we can notice outliers, and then that's really for human survival purposes, right? So we actually find out even you randomize the vector orientation and the magnitude, people can still find it. So quantum physicists, their simulation, like I said, they are actually not that structured as we see here. They are also like randomly distributed in space. So that's led us to believe that for managing huge amount of data, you really want to apply the ensemble mechanisms. The second important observation that has not been published in this literature is related to their driller and scanner behavior. That's what we call. So if you gave them this, so this is eye tracking data where the dot actually represent their fixation, and the line representing their saccade movement. And then we also call this context switching. So that means that the participant's eye move from one location to the other, right? So if you ask participants to say search for this item, so this is prime the search, right? So that means I give you the target, and then you look from from many vectors here. So if you give them color, you can see they are drillers. There are more drillers where they only scan this area. That means before they launch their fixation onto other location, they already know that those areas are not target area without even putting attention to those areas. But if you use this, our original split vector, and then people's eye kind of hung around, and then we call them scanner. They are basically just scanning around, trying to find the target, which is here. And then they frequently come back and trying to find the pattern matching. So this driller and the scanner really make me to think that there is a area with people hasn't been focusing so much, which I call this dark data, which is human behavior. We often believe that the visual encoding just improve the accuracy, but actually change human behaviors. So this made me to right now doing work to think about if I can capture their behavior or use eye tracking, can I characterize the efficiency of people? So if I can characterize people, then we will be able to design intelligent interfaces to nudge people to be more efficient, right? So this is kind of like a next generation kind of human eye teaming perspective of knowing this ambient intelligence in the environment. We can characterize the physicists' the current state and offer needed help when they analyze very complex data. So we look at many, since then we look at many tasks together with quantum physicists and show they always work for different data set I'm showing here. And then they also work for two-dimensional hybrid visual representation. So in case you don't know, this is a very high frequency. So we did a topological data analysis, and then you can get where the structure varies. And then you can overlay that on top of a different blurred visual representation where this is where it actually allows people to look at the data from different distance. So you can walk around still being able to understand it. And then but that's not important for this talk. So the thing is, so if we show the symmetry and then the global pattern still stand out. So so we use this principle to oh my goodness. Okay, so I think I have a video. It doesn't allow me to. Okay, so we use this to build a tool, kind of like a hybrid environment where we give this both 2D and 3D dimensional environment to let quantum physicists to select from both 2D patterns and 3D patterns to configure their different empirical study conditions, so they can do this fairly complex analysis. There are some summary glyphs which I'm not going to talk about today. All right, so this is basically Henan's whole dissertation work, where she spent years looking into this what's a theory underlying this very complex large data analysis, how to use this vision science theory to allow people to really understand it. So our results actually show that this ensemble also pre-attentive feature, and they are independent of their locations. And then it can facilitate very challenging search tasks. And also humans, we also see forest before trees. So we kind of be the first to validate the theory actually work for a very complex environment. So my another student actually right now summarizing what are the ensemble papers that in the literature, in the visualization literature, that would give us a better understanding of how people have been showing a group of similar objects in visualization domain. So we look at quantum physics, but there are many, for example, sets is a good ensemble, and any cluster information would be a good ensemble representation. And also flow field, and also the tensor field. I spent almost 10 years studying for the brain imaging. That's also ensemble, which we also had a paper on people's ability to derive summary statistics from a huge amount of tubes. So in this, so our work also showed even is quantitative data, perhaps you actually want to use a categorical color to add to your scene to allow this earlier ensemble visual perception. So when I was a student, my boss, David Lela, always tells me remove color. So because color actually that's just so easy to be misused, and then the fundamental principle in our lab is just don't use it if you don't know how to use it, right? So but we actually find out that if you add to the attribute, and then you work well. So I think even more important is this, what I mentioned earlier, this dark side of human behavior. So I'm very, very interested in cognitive trait to design maybe next generation ambient intelligence system where we actually study human behavior. So can this eye tracking behavior differentiate people from people, differentiate expertise differences? It actually turned out to be true. So so we're collecting a lot of eye tracking data, but kind of like stop a little bit during the COVID year. All right, so so what are the related concepts that's actually related to ensemble, which is the similar items displayed in the environment? So you might heard about GIST from old Olivia. So that's actually about the phenomenon experience of understanding everything at once. So that paper was published in 2005, actually established as a, it might be cited thousands of times as a foundational work in vision. But the mechanism wasn't explained until recently. People actually believe that GIST is very related to ensemble perception. And even Gestalt principle, which people had trouble explaining in the past, and now is linked to ensemble perception. Another concept which my lab and also Michelle Boken, when she was a student with Hans Peter at Harvard, spending a lot of time studying memorability. I was certainly infected when I was at Harvard as well. So we look at, so I didn't believe the phenomenon. So what I did is basically just run study trying to replicate what they have. So I was amazed that how consistent peoples are when we show this feature, although nobody knows what they are, but people just consistently remember certain images. So think about it if it's very useful for educational purpose or advertisement, etc. So I think it's an interesting phenomenon that's definitely deserve more studies. So we also look at breast cancer imaging and say, so this is Evans, Professor Evans' work when she was at Harvard, looking into fraction of a second, radiologists actually can detect the cancer. So even without pay attention to the image, without detailed scrutiny. So which is interesting phenomenon. So this also related to our work with genetics. So this is very large interactive large network analysis. So my student Alexandra Gabrino designed the environment where we're using this mirroring metaphor. So we originally didn't really understand why it could work. So you don't have to understand. This is the entire chicken genome if you want to know. So what we can do, quick comparison is actually even, so this you can think about this as a cluster, right? So if you think about using the traditional approach, this would be a really bad design. But actually it worked well because our eyes can actually, it's now confined to that location, and our eyes can really understand the graph patterns, even when you create different mirroring plane to allow people to compare different pathways. Yeah, this is also released publicly, and my collaborator use it on daily basis to compare chickens, crocodiles, human genome. All right, so I told you kind of stories of this ensemble visualization and how we have been using this human vision recent development on this dual process to understand a large amount of data. So I'm going to switch gear a little bit. So I have a few minutes left. So I have the privilege to work with an international team together. So Petra Isenberg, Tobias Isenberg, Michael Senemeyer, Thorsten Muller, and recently I also invited Han Wei and Robert. So with the first 4 authors, we have been collaborating for 10 years. So we work on, for example, looking into, so it's all driven by the question, what is visualization, right? So so we look at, we use a meta-analysis approach, mainly look at the text in the past to say what are the usability evaluation methods, and what are the keywords, what are the area that actually are upcoming, and what are the area that are dying, and which area, what's going on with our own discipline. To me, I'm passionate about it because I'm really interested in, okay, can we actually, for social goods, can we actually help low literacy people to read papers? So can we use some intelligent method to help people around? So, so what you know, or most people know, is this, oops. Okay, all right, that's fine. Let me move this to this. I hope you can still see. So, so this is this image navigator. What we did is, so in the previous work, we mainly talk about, so we mainly did the analysis on text data, but we were able to extract the entire history of visualization, all the images in history. So you can also do search. So if you, so this is linked to the VisPub data and CSIG-VIS, which we published earlier. You can also look for a specific author. So I can look for Xiaoru. So I say Xiaoru. So you can look at, so I have to get rid of cancer perhaps, and then you can look at the massive publications Xiaoru has, and then you can look at it as something like picture view. You can click on it, and then you can see which year Xiaoru published a paper and what kind of figure he has. You could also do this paper card wheel, which gives you by year. So Xiaoru's first paper from this paper from 2005 and to 2020, and then you can, so the color of the box represent the paper type. So you can just turn on and off. You can see Xiaoru perhaps published in all areas. And then you can also kind of like turn on the algorithm and the equation. So So you can look at larger icon if you want, and then you can also get a paper wheel, and then certainly you can share in social media if you want. Okay, so how did we get it? So I think so we're hoping that this tool actually allow someone to look into the literature and do more analysis related to the similarities, or just look at the way VIS is developing, so you can turn on off certain features. Since I'm going to be running out of time, let's see where am I. If I can find my slides. All right, so we're back. All right, so so the output are in the public space. We also released the machine learning model. So I'm not going to dive deep into the data. I think you are in this discipline. You can just flip the proceedings and see how so this is a curated data. So we carefully check it. So all the data are released to the IEEE data port. So it's open. So what we did, the most interesting work is actually the algorithm itself. So so if given the algorithm basically taking input from this paper image and the output to give me the label for the title, authors, and give me the image, the caption, abstract, and the mean text, right? So our algorithm is actually scalable. So the goal is to generate training data that is 100% accuracy without any human annotation. So in all the literature about deriving data, there are basically two approaches. The first approach is to manually annotate some data to generate some training, and then you can feed it to the neural network to have supervised training. The second approach, you can have crowd to label your paper, and then you pay the crowd to do the job, right? So hopefully they do well. So Allen Institute basically tried both approach, but said both approach are error-prone. And they CSIG also has the algorithm, but also they depends on heavily human involvement. So we 7 faculty sitting together were saying we don't have time. And then I came up with this approach, render to real. So since paper is rendered, right? So basically, I can generate some random text and then put as a title, and then put some random author, and then just insert some image and insert whatever component part you want from a paper or your classifier. In this way, actually you can generate any number of labels. You can also generate any number of object you want for your classifier. And it turned out it worked really well. So here are some papers I generated. So you could, so it doesn't make sense at all, right? So we can have side whatsoever. But it has the correct label. You can have algorithm, you can have table, you choose your own layout. So you can generate as many as you wish. So we generate a ton and then come out. So I'm not going to give you detail, but we publish at AI conferences. And this is the first paper I told my students, this is actually first paper we got a review saying, oh, this is very smart. So so you can imagine, you can use this approach, graphics approach, to extract, to generate the surrogate, to extract the document from any type of document, which is an interesting solution. So we use some approach. So as I'm interested in doing the allow people to read information, so we also do this chart reading. So if you have charts, how can you read? So this gives you kind of like a human. So horizontal axis is the chart type. I'm only showing type 1, type 4. So type 1 is the traditional chart. Type 4 is the stacked data bar chart. And then this is a human performance. This is a CNN, which has a much lower error. And this is another type of CNN. So basically, we're trying to see what's the best approach that's to allow the machine learning algorithm to read the chart. And we use a similar approach to read the tables to extract the information from table. Okay, so I guess in time. So to conclude, so human visual understanding doesn't really come from the local feature. It's actually the global feature that matters. So several interesting concepts I presented today related to the gist ensembles or memorability, they are actually inherent into the human visual system that we visualization society hasn't been using in the past in dealing with very large data. So, and seeing a chunk of information is also very, very different from reading a single item, and then we actually don't read a single item, we read them as a chunk. And then I also use this approach to do interactive large graph analysis. So in the future, I'm really interested in how to allow human and the machine to co-read, and really interested in building this human AI teaming environment that allow low literacy folks to learn better. So I thank you for your attention. This is still my favorite feature all time from Brown. The camera captured a swinging bats. All right, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Professor Chen, for the excellent talk. So actually, we have a few questions from the audience. Personally, I also have a few questions. So let's start from the question from the audience first. So the first question is that the audience asked that in your research work, when combining methods from computer science, psychology, and so on, how to design the evaluation task, and what type of task must be designed, and how much data to collect can make the work be considered convincing? What are the advantages of split vector when the data range is small? I mean, this audience apparently has so many questions, so let's start from the first one. So how to design the evaluation task?
That's a very good question. So I actually like Tamara's approach, where she has this abstraction, right? So she has this what, when, why, how, who. So generally I talk to scientists and then abstract the task to the extent that physicists, for example, in the college can do it. So the hard part is actually that's a very good question, by the way. So the hard part is like you need to find participants, right? So if you design tasks and then you only get 3 quantum physicists or 3 green scientists, then you're not going to, your paper won't get accepted. So yeah. Hold on. So what we do is, so you still want to have those 3 participants, you have 3 experts and always involve them. And then you abstract the task to the level that a college, say physics major or anyone with engineering major will be able to do it. So in our paper, we actually recruit a very broad audience. So people who study chemistry, physics, and engineering, medicine. So anyone can come and do the task. So that's how we do it. And we also ensure the validity of the study by talking to quantum physicists and make sure the task is not like too simple. Then you want to get insight that is useful to scientists as well. So I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, of course. I also think this is a very interesting question. So I mean, apparently this audience also have a few other questions, but as this is a very interesting question, so allow me to ask a follow-up question. So I mean, because I'm doing CSIG-VIS, right? So from my perspective, I'm thinking now the CSIG-VIS is getting more and more diverse. So we now are facing many different applications, different tasks. So do you think, is there any way I mean, you mentioned Tamara's work, but she's more focused on the info-based, right? So, I mean, do you think there's any general rule for CSIG-VIS? Because when we are doing evaluation, we propose our own standards, so the reviewer may not buy it. So, I mean, if there is any like general rule, then it will be easier for us to follow the same principle. So, do you think is that possible?
To be honest, so there is it is a continuity, right? So you can have this very abstract level, or you can have this very realistic level. So the trade-off is that if you have a generic task taxonomy, it's very broadly applicable. You can have other similar data where similar attribute, you will be able to use a generic task taxonomy and still being able to reuse your design recommendation. On the other spectrum, you can have very highly useful to the domain, but it's so special, and then nothing else would be able to apply it, right? And then the other is somewhere in between. So this is what Jeremy Wolf actually call it use-inspired basic research. So it's really inspired by the real world, but you don't go to generic, you lost the domain specificity. So you stay somewhere in the middle and make sure that you still have the data attribute, and then summarize the task and summarize the task and get the data somewhere in the middle. Certainly, it's very hard to say where I am in this continuity and convince your reviewer that this is actually useful. We have the same trouble all the time. So to me, I think it's very hard, or often I'm actually unwilling to go the very generic approach because it's really not useful to scientists anymore. I like to characterize the data. So for example, in quantum physics, and then we know the data range, we just say, okay, so here is the data range, but we adjust it into different bins to make sure that our evaluation actually cover very much broader, maybe still in the same data range, but there might be different distributions, and then make sure in each bin we take the even sample. This is also what Colin Ware recommended. I don't mean to talk from his back. I know it's also recorded, but I invited him to give a distinguished lecture. I asked him the same question, and his answer basically, you know, try to, so binning is actually a very good approach. Make sure that when you make the data choices, you actually divide them into different bins to make sure you have a very broad coverage for other disciplines that share similar data but might have slightly different attributes.
Okay. So let's go back to the audience question. So her next question is, what type of task must be designed? So I guess we pretty much already answered this. So, and how much data to collect can make the work be considered convincing? So do you have any suggestions?
Yeah, I do. So I think that's actually a statistic question. So you can do this thing called the power analysis. Jenny, so you do power analysis to determine the number of participants you would need in order to give the statistical significance power. And then the other one I highly recommend is to do to measure the effect size. So when you every time you would also do pilot, right? So when you do pilot, you might just take 6 participants, and then you do the effect size analysis. The effect size will tell you if you add more participants, will that give you likelihood of obtaining significant result, or it's just kind of like a pseudo, and then you won't be able to get significance even you add more participants. So so always measure effect size, which is not commonly used in this society. So that's one thing maybe I really want to change. So I'm also the VGTC chair for conferences. So so to set up the kind of so I don't believe there is like a one single statistical approach we should use, and I always ignore when someone say, oh, you report a p-value, you shouldn't, right? So I don't think that's legitimate either, but I want to say there is a broad statistical solutions, and then just make it available to the community, so we realize we're being educated in that domain. So that's what I really want to do. So I thank you for the question.
Okay, yeah, I think that would be very, I mean, that would be very meaningful work to achieve. So, and I think the next question is, we are going to a specific one. So, the audience asking, what are the advantages of split vector when the data range is small, even though I know the data will be large?
Yeah. So when it's small, the advantage, that's an interesting question I have never thought about. If it's small, then it's just the same as regular vector, I would imagine, because your exponent would be the same. So if they all just have one color, then you just have this one vector, colored vector. So I think the interesting thing is when you have data that cross boundary, and I think if you have a small range data, but you might be interested in some sparse point in the data, you could potentially use split vector for telling you where those splitting points are. So you could assign. So you can have small range, but you might still be interested in the very high resolution in the small range data. So range is different from resolution, right? So and then you could assign those to different color. Then that give you a very clear division of your data that you can still use ensemble perception to understand the data distribution.
Okay, so so let's move on to the to another audience. So she's asking. So I think I mean the question is kind of difficult to understand. So basically, she's asking: is there a better standard to guide us in designing visual images? I guess I guess you mean visual visualization results. So she said, for example, whether to consider color or pattern first, and so on. So, and how should we think about the visualization design? So basically, the how to take the, I guess it's the how to take the order of different factors into consideration, I guess.
Yeah, so that's a very good question, and it's a very hard one. So if you look at recent years, there are still ranking papers, right? So if you take Bertin's 7-dimension or take the 10-dimension standard version, and so basically people say, okay, the way you do it, you map the most important factor to the most salient factor, right? So at least for human, right? So to AI, that's a different question. So to human, you pick the most salient one and you do the mapping. So oftentimes, so that's how I teach students as well. But oftentimes when we consider ranking, we really treat that glyph, that multivariant data analysis, we only look at that single point. We don't look at the global pattern distribution. So I think what I would do is certainly still follow the approach that's already working for so many years, and then really see whether or not it can bring the global distribution and basically the ensemble side. If not, then maybe swap a couple of them and to make the salient factor you want to represent to stand out. That is what I would do.
Okay, I guess that is a very practical suggestion to follow. So another question is, so when the visualization results are very complex, is there any way to encode human attention and then use machine learning to automatically simplify the visualization results?
Oh, wonderful, wonderful question. Wow, okay.
Yeah.
So, Steve Feiner, so he's a professor at Columbia University. So he designed this attention-based approach many years ago because not due to the huge data, but due to the limited computational resources. Then if you have a huge environment, you won't be able to compute every single point. So what he did, or his student did, was to you only render high resolution. You are in the fovea region, and then you render very blurred image in the peripheral. So, but I guess that doesn't actually address your question, because to the ensemble perception, even you don't see the peripheral, you still maybe actually render a little bit of detail that give you better ensemble perception. I don't know. I don't know the answer. Yeah, I don't know. So attention driven. So if I were to answer, let me tweak your question a little bit. So if I were to answer that question, I'm going to use machine learning to test what machine is good at answering. So when we give a visualization, it doesn't mean that a machine enjoy the same type of visual cue as humans. Then so if I'm working with the AI environment, which we're also building, so what is the communication we should have with the AI to make sure the AI gets the correct visual cue as well as human? So so there would be a kind of like a ranking study to understand what the machine understand and what the human understand, and then what's the compensation, what is the complementary role the tool can play. It doesn't mean the best AI with the best human gave the best rendering. So there is an optimal space where it's the envelope that draws the boundary for this two powerful viewer. So that's how I would tackle it, to list the parameters that are related to the design and study what's the envelope where you would achieve the optimal performance.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's actually a very interesting question, because when you talk about the I find a bullet point in your presentation very inspiring for me. Is that it's saying like the visual encoding will alter the viewer's behavior. So at that point, I was also thinking a similar question there. I mean, whether the viewer's behavior can also change the visual encoding to make these two factors fit better. So I guess that's basically the same question. So personally, I also have a lot of questions. So but since the time is due to the time limit, so let me be concise. So actually, because I'm working on CSIG-VIS, so now I think the scientific simulation benefit from the high performance computing. So they are getting like larger and larger data. So but on the other hand, the visualization, the human perception is kind of limited. So we cannot process like a lot of information at the same time. So do you think the scientific visualization can also benefit from the computation power of supercomputer? So like the very, very large scale visualization. And if the answer is yes, then how can we benefit from that? So
wonderful. So I can think about the two approaches. So by no means I'm the computational expert. So Professor Tao, you know much more than me actually. So I would think one approach is that don't render, don't compute if you don't need to say it. So that's too human, right? So if I'm not even seeing this piece of data, then just don't compute, don't render. Certainly backend, I would have to figure out the algorithms how to do that. But that's the approach that people already begin to pick up from the database community about how to split the database to figure out how to keep the human in the loop without doing this massive computational basically wasted if people don't even see it, right? So on the other hand, so I still think the human AI teaming is really, really interesting. So so you can certainly ask the computing if we can get the real-time performance, and then just ask the machine questions, and then it's really the communication. So I think communication is the key, just like a human collaboration. So the machine needs to tell me, what's your uncertainty? Should I trust you, right? So it's, well, trust is an overloaded word. Yes. So how much, so you should, so there are several companies actually come up with this model card idea, right? So Adobe, Google, Amazon, they all have this model card. The model card is a way that the machine tell human or human tell machine, what am I training my model, and what's the likelihood for the question you gave me that the answer I gave you might not be correct or correct, right? So I think if the computational power is sufficient, and if human actually give the machine good data, nowadays it's actually all about whether or not you have the right data set to fit into the machine to give you good results. So it's a human responsibility. That's why I also think that often we talk about AI is not AI is biased. It's not AI is biased. It's we human problem that we didn't feed the right data to the machine. So I think if we find where the data is lacking, and then we understand the feedback from the machine, and then we can use a surrogates approach or whatsoever that's that can allow machine to do better. I think that might be another possibility. But that's a tough question. I'm just make up the answer. So yeah.
Yeah, I think it's very helpful. So but I still need some time to digest to how to put it into practice, how to reinforce them to leverage the supercomputing power, or to on the other hand to simplify the data. So okay, so I guess we are pretty much reached the time, and if the audience still have questions, I guess they can send you email. And I mean, now we have a large community, visualization community in China. So I hope that we can have more like a collaboration work between the international and the domestic scientists. So yeah, Professor Chen, so thank you very much for the very inspirational talk and I mean the insightful answers. So yeah, so really thank you. So I guess I will share the screen again to introduce the to kind of advertise for the next speaker. Okay.
Thank you very much, and thank you for coming. Feel free to email me. Thank you, organizers, for hosting my talk. Thank you.
So 2 weeks later, so on January 20th, we will have Professor Koji Koyamada from Kyoto University to bring us the top visual analysis to support the derivation and solution of PDEs using neural networks. So we will looking for everyone to participate in that event again. So thank you very much for the participation. Okay.